What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Play by Play podcast. This is episode 32. I'm your host, Diego Gallegos, and today on the podcast, we're going to be covering the 2024 draft, certain teams' draft positions, the state of this draft, and the top players that are in it. Now, as you can see around us, we are in a little bit of a different setup today in a new spot recording, so I'm sorry if this episode and the next couple episodes ahead have some changes, maybe some possible camera angle changes, maybe some sound changes, some line changes, just trying to figure out what looks best. So please bear with me, please be patient, and hopefully in the next couple of episodes we can get things figured out and continue to be consistent. If you haven't already, please follow the Play by Play podcast on all social medias, that being Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Play by Play podcast. It would be super appreciated, especially our TikTok, where you will begin to see daily TikToks posted of recent NBA news, possible fantasy matchups, and a new segment that I'm going to be starting on there every single week called Factual Friday, where I share with you guys some possibly unknown facts about the NBA. But with all that put aside, let's get into the topic of the day. 2024 NBA draft is here. It's in just a couple of weeks, believe begins June 17th. And man, has this been probably one of the most covered drafts that we have seen in the past couple of years. And the thing about it is it's been covered because of how bad it is, because of how weak it is, because of the lack of depth that is in this class. This is probably one of the weakest classes that we have seen, possibly in the last 25 years. And I did some research looking across drafts from the past 25 years, kind of just looking at who was drafted. And of course, we don't know what these players are going to be. We know what their potential could possibly be, but we don't know what they're going to grow into. But just looking at drafts from the past 25 years, I looked at the drafts that had under 5 players that made an all-star team and under 3 players that made an all-NBA team. And here are the drafts that I got. So the drafts that have less than 5 people making an all-star team is the year 2000, 2002, 2010, 2013, 2015, and 2019. 6 years. Could possibly count out 2019 there because it's only been 4 years since those guys have been drafted. I gave a little bit more slack to the recent draft classes because obviously those guys need more time. But then looking at the ones who have had 3 players under less than 3 players that made an All-NBA team, you have year 2000, 2015, and 2019 as well. So really 2 drafts that have seriously underperformed and had some lack of talent. And if you look back at those drafts, I mean, it's very similar to the draft that we had today. So if we look at 2000, your notable players from there are guys like Michael Redd, Morris Peterson, Quentin Richardson, Mike Miller, Kenyon Martin. And the thing with a draft like that is, as you can see, with those players, many of them are role players. Michael Redd became a pretty good player when he was with the Milwaukee Bucks, top star. But a lot of these guys are either incredible athletes or they're very specific to one certain skill, like Mike Miller was an incredible shooter. And that's something that we're kind of seeing with this draft class this year. So many of these guys, they're incredible athletes, but they're just super raw with the basketball fundamentals. Or you have somebody who's really good in one area but lacks in all the others, which really makes them a subpar prospect at best. Let's look at 2015. 2015 is one that underperformed. This draft class was a lot more talented. You have many of the good players that you have today: Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Kristaps Porzingis, Miles Turner, Devin Booker. These guys have all turned into solid NBA players. But if you notice, they're also guys who have been associated with not being able to get over the hump, whether it's in the playoffs, whether it's leading a team when they're the top star or the second guy. It's been guys that have struggled in the prime lights when looking at it. Looking at some other drafts that, maybe didn't fit the bill, but still lacked when it came to talent. 2013, it was a terrible draft. Victor Oladipo, you had Giannis, who probably saved that draft, but remember, Giannis did not develop until 4 years in. You had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, CJ McCollum, who's turned out to be decent, Steven Adams as a role player, Dennis Schroeder, role player, Rudy Gobert, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, but is somebody who is a very specific skill set. 2010, John Wall, Derek Favors, DeMarcus Cousins, Gordon Hayward. So you can see these are drafts that are statistically looked at to be drafts full of role players, drafts full of spectacular athletes. 2013, Giannis, he was drafted just based off of the incredible athlete that he was in Greece and the high potential and how raw he was. John Wall was a great athlete. And then when you look at the drafts that have paid off, when you look at the drafts who have been very talented, you look at a draft like 2011 that had guys like Kyrie Irving, Kemba, Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard. 2009 that had Blake Griffin, James Harden, Steph Curry, DeMar DeRozan. I could go on and on and on. And of course, the penultimate of all of them, possibly the greatest draft of all time, in 2003 with LeBron, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Carmelo Anthony, David West. That class already has 2 Hall of Famers, likely to get 2 more in the future. The drafts that you see are good. You have still very, very young prospects like LeBron coming out of high school, but these are prospects that are well rounded in their game already, that had 1 to no weaknesses in their game and simply just need the experience at the NBA level. And it's just not something that we're seeing with this draft class this year. I have looked through a lot of the top players this year for this draft. And if we look at it, and you see me look over here, I'm looking at some of my notes that I have. You look at somebody like Nikola Topic, who's dominating in Serbia right now. You might think that he's a great prospect. Really looking at it, he is a high-level European playmaker. Elite size at 6'6" for the point guard position. And he could be desirable to specific NBA franchises, especially one possibly like San Antonio or Washington, who need a front top point guard. His IQ is incredible to find players. But if you really look at his tape, his handle's very awkward. He stands up a lot when his handle is going on. His back is arched. He dribbles like this a lot of the time, which can make him really weak to getting knocked off balance by certain defenders. His shot is below average. You see in the tape when he plays that many of the defenders that are guarding him sit 2 or 3 feet behind the three-point line, daring him to shoot. He doesn't have a very great jump shot. The athleticism is below average. It's nothing special. He doesn't have top speed or a great first step. So with a guy like that, sure, there's some room for improvement. Sure, there's some room where he can grow. But if he doesn't, it's not going to be a top-level player that is worth a top 3, top 4 draft pick. At his floor, he could possibly be somebody like Thomas Satoransky, who is possibly a solid backup point guard, one of the better backup point guards in today's game today. You look at somebody like Alex Sarr, who is the best player in this draft, or seen to be the best player in this draft, who is a guy who a lot of people have been looking at as going number 1 overall. Now, Sarr, granted, isn't a bad prospect whatsoever. When I looked at his tape, I was actually pleasantly surprised. Sitting at 7'1", 7'5" wingspan, great length, incredible athlete. Runs downhill like a deer going downhill. Was great, and the length that he has on him allows him to be a great rim protector. And with his size, with his athleticism, he can also guard all 5 on the court. And he has shown some ability to space the floor as well. But the big problem, and this has been a big problem with many of the athletes that are coming out of this draft, very thin, very skinny, needs to add muscle to his frame to be successful in the league. Now, I know you're thinking, guys like Wemby and Chet have come in to the league and have had solid seasons despite their weight problems. And sure, but we've also seen players like Anthony Davis struggle early on, first 2 or 3 years into his career when he didn't add weight on. It really depends on the player and what their skill set is. And Alex Sarr does not have the skill set of a Chet, doesn't have a skill set of a Wemby to be able to stretch the floor, that has the handle of a Victor Wembanyama. He's not that type of skilled type player. And so for him to be able to be successful in this league, if he's to be drafted by somebody like Atlanta, who has the number 1 overall pick and be put in the center position, which is where their hole is, he's going to have to build some weight onto him to be able to contend with the bigger guys in this league, like Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, because if he doesn't, he's going to get pushed around. And for him, really, it's a gamble. It's a gamble because if he can't add that size to his frame, if his youth, if his inexperience, if he can't catch on to the game's speed, and develop his IQ, I look at him as being a guy who could get as high as a Kristaps Porzingis in this league, who at his peak with the Knicks was a solid player, but is not somebody that you can trust to be a number 1 guy with the franchise. And again, when we're looking at top 3, when we're looking at number 1 overall, This is a franchise guy. It's a cornerstone player. It's a guy that you're looking to move forward with your franchise. He's not that guy. He's going to be somebody who is going to need support with the team that he is drafted with. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm going to take a little drink. He's somebody that is going to need somebody like a solid backcourt behind him to work in the pick and roll with him. It's not a type of guy who is going to be able to be the number one option on his team unless he has something like a career that Giannis had, where the first 4 years were kind of a struggle. He built into his body a little bit more. He saw what was working for him, driving to the basket, and he becomes dominant. And at his floor, if the jumper can't develop, if he's not able to stretch the floor, he could be a Mitchell Robinson. Again, a solid starter, possibly fifth starter, if not somebody who comes off the bench. Solid rim protector. So you can see just throughout how we have just such a high ceiling, but such a low floor. We have such a gamble, a rolling of the dice. And I'm not sure if teams are going to be happy with their selections. I'm not sure if teams are going to want to select in this draft. It's going to be very interesting to see how many teams trade out of their draft position. And it's going to be interesting to see the value that they can get. I'm not sure if you can get a fifth starter with your draft pick. I'm not sure if you could get somebody like a Derek White from Boston, just putting that out there. Boston wanted to trade in. I'm not sure if you could get Carson Wallace from Oklahoma City. The value is just not there for these draft picks, and it's such a high risk for so many of these guys. It's boom or bust that I'm not sure if any teams are really going to be super aggressive in jumping up in this draft. Let's look at some of the guys that I like, possibly somebody like a Ron Holland. G League Ignite, probably the second best player on G League Ignite. I think that Matas was a little bit better than him. Matas Bazis, who we might talk about a little bit later. Like Jaden Hardy from last year, like Scoot Henderson from last year, like Jaden Hardy from the year before that. Ron is super aggressive. He's an incredible slasher. He's a dog. He likes going to the hole, and he's very, very effective at it. He's also a dog on defense. Great length on him. Is able to get into that passing lane, disrupt passing lanes a lot, but not very efficient. Shot 24% from three this season. Barely clawed a 72% shooting percentage from the free throw line. And because of that lack of shooting, it makes him a little bit more predictable when he goes to his offensive game. Teams are starting to scout the driving game a little bit more, and it's making it less and less effective because teams simply know what he's going to do. Not to mention, he lacks the ability, because of the lack of ball handling, he lacks the ability to really create space, create shots when he's looking to go to that jumper, which is already weak. So again, we're in a position where it's a high ceiling, low floor. You could see him develop possibly into somebody like an Andrew Wiggins, Rudy Gay, a very, very good slasher that is also great on the defensive end. On the low, I'm not sure. It's going to be, he could be a one-way type of player. Somebody like a Kyle Anderson, possibly. Somebody who's solid at defense, but can't shoot the ball very effectively, is going to be somebody that people are going to run off the three-point line a lot. So it's gamble after gamble after gamble with this draft. Let's look at a couple of other guys that I liked. Let's look at Matas. We talked about Matas. Actually, no, let's not look at Matas. Let's look at Cody Williams. Cody Williams out of Colorado, somebody that I thought should be in consideration for a top 5, top 3. Somebody who I feel like is one of the more well-polished players in this draft. Somebody who's projected to go likely top 10, end of the top 10 at 8, 9, or 10 with a team that needs a big forward. So Cody Williams, 6'10", 7-foot wingspan, efficient scorer, especially when attacking the rim. 47% of his field goals come from attacking the rim. Exceptional passer for his size, really embodies what the point forward is, almost like a young Scottie Pippen, if you will. And also a solid jumper for him, 41.5% from three, 55% from the field. But while he is excellent at attacking the basket, while he is great for making space for his layups, again, he's not somebody who does a great job at creating space for his jumper. He's much more effective shooting when he's looking for a spot up three. That's when he's been more effective. If he gets space going to the rim, a lot of times it's likely off of a pick and roll from a big man. He can't do it on his own. Also, his 41% from three, as great as it is, smaller sample size. The dude only averaged 1.7 attempted three-pointers throughout his season last year at Colorado. He's not really a huge volume guy. So it's a small sample size. Again, you don't know really much about him. It's 1 year. He didn't really showcase his shooting very much as you wanted him to. Again, more of a slashing guy, has a lot of holes in his game, a little bit raw. He needs to add muscle to his frame. He isn't able to rebound very well because of that muscle in his frame. Could be very likely to get injured, which is the question with a lot of guys in these drafts because of how thin they are and because they need to add that muscle. Could get injured. If you look at his ceiling, could be an incredible scorer. Could be somebody like a Brandon Ingram, who is one of the top scorers in the league, if he's able to build the fact that he's able to create space for his shot and get to his effective spots for his jumper. But at the floor, he's really just a solid defensive guy like a Jonathan Isaac, somebody who, again, has trouble stretching the floor, goes to the slashing a lot. So the thing with this draft is, I'm going to keep saying it, gamble after gamble after gamble after gamble. It's the question of, is the guy you picked going to work out, or is the guy that you passed on going to be the one that worked out? Now, looking at some of the teams that are at the top of the draft, you look at teams such as Atlanta, Washington, teams such as that, possibly even Detroit. These are teams that luckily are in a position that could likely take a couple more years to rebuild, especially if Atlanta chooses to trade Trae Young, which is something that I would look out for. Look for them to trade Trae Young to somebody who really needs a point guard, like the San Antonio Spurs, possibly, who have 2 picks in the top 10. We'll probably get to them in a second. But somebody like the Atlanta Hawks, who has a couple of still young players in there, like DeAndre Hunter, and is rebuilding the entire house, maybe they do have the timeline to possibly be patient and develop some of these guys. But when you're a team such as Oklahoma City at number 12, when you are the Sacramento Kings, teams who are already very established, you're not going to have time to develop these guys as much. They're going to want to put them into their rotation right away. And the question is, are these guys going to be effective? The Houston Rockets, who despite having a top 3 pick, have had a plethora of young guys come in, and is a team that I believe is going to want to start contending sooner or later. Jalen Green took a huge step this year, becoming their number 1 guy. We have guys such like Amen Thompson. Alperen Sengun has been one of the most improved centers in the league so far this year. They're not somebody who's going to have to be on the clock waiting for somebody like Alex Sarr, like a Nikola Topic, like a Zachary Richier. These are guys that are going to want to start to win now because they have the young core, possibly bring in 1 or 2 more veterans for them. I know they signed Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks the previous year, but it's a team that is starting to get a little bit restless just because how many of the young, talented guys they've gotten. And the question is, are they going to have the patience to want to sit down, develop these guys, and possibly wait for them to grow for another 2-3 years? I'm not so sure about that. Then again, they can't trade out of that spot. It's going to be really difficult to get somebody valuable, a valuable veteran coming out of that spot. So overall, it's such an interesting draft. It's one of the worst drafts that we've seen in the past 25 years. It's a draft that who knows is what's going to happen. It's really going to be a pick-to-pick type draft where if one team takes one player, it could possibly mess up every team's entire draft board, because I truly believe that most of these teams have these players ranked very similarly, that they're going to have priority very similarly on most of these players, because there's no way of really making any type of distinction or separating any of them. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these teams attack this matter. Now I want to go to a couple of guys that I think could maybe be possible steals, maybe late first round, early second round, late second round even possibly, and guys that I think are possibly a little bit more mature in this game and just have to add a couple of things and could possibly be good to go, and teams should look for later in the draft. Somebody like N'Faly Dante out of Oregon, probably one of the most underrated and overlooked players in this draft. Senior out of Oregon. I think the thing that's deterring people right now is his age, him being a senior out. We know how that affects teams' priorities. But also he's had a little bit of an injury history, especially with his knees. He had a torn ACL, had some knee issues throughout his junior year. So that could. But when you look at the numbers, 17 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks in his senior season. An incredible athlete, another guy who runs the floor exceptionally when you look at his tape. And he also has incredible ability to rim protect the rim when guys are coming in, which is incredible. And while the offensive game is very limited, he has shown that ability to spread the floor to the mid range. He has been developing a little bit of a mid range shot. Could be somebody that I think somebody should definitely take a chance on in that second round. The ceiling I have is Andre Drummond, somebody who's just an absolute rim run, rim protector, great defender. And at the floor, somebody like a Mo Bamba, somebody who's just lengthy, who might be picked up on the team for length. But again, with a second round pick, how can you deny that type of gamble? It's not like I'm drafting him with the number 1 overall pick. Here's another one, Coleman Hawkins out of Illinois, somebody that I also like Dante. Think is somebody who's definitely going to be another second round guy. Again, 4-year at Illinois, 3-year starter over there. Somebody who has a lot of experience, high IQ, very mature player, is very versatile at his 6'10" with his solid athleticism. Is somebody who likely could guard all 5 positions on the floor. Very unselfish and very underrated playmaker. Does a great job seeing over doubles and seeing open men, especially in the backside corner. Is somebody who is very, very confident from becoming a spot-up shooter, especially out of the pick and pop, which is something that teams could use, and not afraid to attack the rim at all. 36% of his field goal attempts come from around the rim. He has a pretty solid, a little bit average, pretty solid post game. It's pretty basic, but he's able to get to his spots. Again, I think with him, I think the big thing is going to be adding more weight to his frame, like a lot of these guys, and just picking up a little bit of struggles that he's had shooting-wise, averaging 57% from the free throw line. But if he works out, could be a solid stretch forward, like a Nikola Mirotic that was on the Bulls and the Pelicans a couple of years ago. And the floor could be somebody like an Elise Johnson, just a very athletic, great defender. But somebody, again, that should be looked at in the second round because it's not as a gamble as if you're taking in the top 10. So those are my thoughts. Those are my thoughts for this draft. I know, very, very quick episode. Trying to shorten up the podcast episode a little bit for you guys. I know a couple of you guys have been complaining about the high 50 minutes to an hour podcast, so I apologize. And once again, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for your time. And again, make sure to please follow the TikTok and Instagram at Play by Play Podcast. Without further ado, guys, that is all for me today. Let me know what you guys think about this 2024 draft. Is this really the worst draft in 25 years? What players do you not trust? What players do you think might be a steal? And overall, I'll see you guys next time.